Hello, everybody, and welcome to Vintage Books Live. Tonight we are talking to Paul Iarabino, and I actually have one with me. He is the editor of Covidology. I believe you also have at least one piece in Covidology as well. It's an anthology of people just um, about their experiences during the pandemic. And so we thought it would be fun to just have Paul on and have a little conversation about the book and how it came to be and being an editor and all of that good stuff. So I will start out by asking what I typically start out with when I have these interviews is just, can you talk a little bit about how this book came to be?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Christy. I'm excited to talk with you about this. So during the pandemic, like everybody's lives, my life just kind of stopped, and there was a big pause. And all of my work as a sort of an artist, storyteller stopped, and all of my volunteer work stopped. And I was doing a lot of volunteer work with older adults. That's the field I've been in for a long time. So what happened was I didn't really know what to do. I also got COVID. I was very sick with it. It all just happened at once. March of 2020 was bad. So then after I'm sort of coming out of this haze, I'm like, well, how can I, you know, make impact? And the senior center was shut down. There was no notice. So I thought, there's something called Zoom. I heard about it, but I didn't really know what it was. And I'm like, maybe if I get a Zoom account. So fast forward through the pandemic, I started one for seniors at a local senior center, and it caught on very quickly. And then these started morphing up more and more and more. And especially in the early days, there was just so much uncertainty about where we were going, and our usual support networks weren't functioning the same way. So I started offering these weekly Zoom groups for people to just sort of check in. Some of them are still happening today. Some of them have morphed. One of my groups is now we do books and movie and a drop in. So
Oh,
it's
fun.
just like the pandemic. But what I found myself was like, I think it was last fall. My days are all mixed up because of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was somewhere in the pandemic. But as we were sort of like closing things out, I realized that some of these stories were just beautiful, like in terms of the evolution. So I reached out to people who were either in the group or people who I knew from the storytelling world. And that's what happened. We each told a story, and I functioned as one of the editors. We had other people volunteering to read the stories. We also had some people say, well, I don't really like to write, but like a story, but I'd like to write poetry. And I'm like, okay. So it's really a collection of stories and poems, really about the pandemic, but also I think it's about resilience. It's about how we are moving forward post-pandemic. Like, what were some of those lessons that we got from it? And so that's kind of how it all
Yeah,
started.
yeah. So what was it like? Because you're a storyteller and you have a piece in
Yes,
this. So you know the
yes.
writing and storytelling end of it. I'm curious what it was like for you to do the editing end of it and if you had ever done anything like that before.
No, I totally made it up because I mean, just first to admit, like, I didn't really know what I was doing. I'm like, we must have an anthology. And then people are like, yes. And so we started meeting on Zoom. So what happened was a lot of it was just built on trust. Many
Yeah.
people are folks that I've already knew or knew of me. And so we just went through this process. One of the things that was challenging for many were Google Docs. Some people have never worked in Google Docs, and I was
Yeah.
very firm from the beginning, like, we're going to use Google Docs. And not everybody knew about Google Docs, and so they were a little
Yeah.
reticent. So we would have people going into the stories and making suggestions and changes. We had beta testers. We had two readers who got it as if it was like a final version, and then we were able to make corrections along the way. Um, so that's how it all kind of came to be. And I was so inspired by that. I've been doing a lot up in Vancouver, like the first Friday. So there's been a lot of interest. I actually spoke about this at Van Talks, and then we're doing them, a bunch of them. And so now what I'm doing is they're taking cohorts of it, let's take all the older folks, and for Older Americans Month in May, we're traveling with it, we're taking it to different places, and then several of us are LGBTQ. So the same thing, we're having all of us who identify as LGBTQ, and we have an event coming up in Vancouver in June, other parts of the state. So that's been really fun. And then just recently, I know you didn't ask me this, but now I'm starting a brand new anthology about LGBTQ, sort of like coming of age stories,
Oh,
and really
neat.
tying that to sort of the modern gay rights movement, of just trying to get a personal story and kind of like tying it to history, so that it's really kind of experiential versus historical, in terms of like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
1973, we were no longer considered, a mental
Yeah,
illness, but really
yeah,
saying like, or just like when Stonewall happened, some people didn't know Stonewall happened because we don't have the news media like
yeah,
we do now, where
yeah.
it's instantaneous. So anyway, that's our
Yeah,
next
no, I'm actually putting a pin in that, because what I usually ask people what's next at the end, and so I would like to circle back around to that and talk to you
oh
about that
sure.
a little bit more. Um, so I didn't get to read every single one of these, but I read a few, and I'm curious which one that wasn't yours, that was what were some highlights? Like, what are some pieces of stories that
Yeah.
you just
Well,
really love?
um, it's hard, because it's like being a parent, and they say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't have any favorites," but there's one in here that I particularly am drawn to, and it's called "Not My Package." It's by
I,
Weston
I was like,
Anderson.
that was what
Did
I
you
was gonna
read
say
that
too.
one?
Yeah.
And he's the youngest storyteller that we have, and his style of writing is just, I love the way he writes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's kind of a toss between like a children's book and like this mystery of like what's
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
box, like what's
Yeah.
in the box, and it's just, he trips over it and it's just in the way, and then he has like this dream because like they were isolating so much during the pandemic, and then at the very end we discover what's in the
What's
box.
in the
and
box, which we shouldn't give
and
away because it's a great
no,
story.
we're not giving it away, but I will tell you this: when we tour with it, we've toured with him now 2 or 3 times. He doesn't read it, so most of us read a story. He like acts the story out, so he memorizes the story, which I could never ever do,
Oh,
and
that's
then he's like
fantastic.
acting it out. So
Yeah.
yes, he's phenomenal. Yes,
Yeah. That
and then I
honestly,
think,
of all the ones that I've been able to like flip through and read so far, that I love. Yeah.
I think that's one of my favorites. And there's our only author from Vancouver, Jameson Green. I love his story as well. I could relate to it because he has a chronic health condition.
Yeah.
He's got pretty bad asthma, so there's this fear about like connecting with other people
Yeah.
and being
Yeah.
out there. And he travels a lot, and he misses sort of like that sort of experience. The title of his is Tailspin, and I think it's just
Yeah.
eloquently written in terms of like what that was like. And then now when he reads the story, it's interesting because he's like, that's not my story anymore. But the thing is, it was at that time. We all
Yeah.
wrote our
Yeah.
stories
Yeah.
where we were at that time. So yeah.
What so you brought them in through Google Docs. Were there any like
Yes.
funny things that happened as you were trying to collect stuff, and people people trying
Well,
to get their
with
stories
with
in?
with one of our writers, she never fully understood Google Docs, and we didn't know this until I think the last day. And so we were all kind of frustrated, and we were making assumptions about each other. So it turns out that after going back and forth with the comments, she was getting kind of testy and said, "Well, I will not sign off on this until I see the final version." And we're like, and I said something like, "Well, you actually can make the final version. Like these are all this like a whole string of comments." And I'm like, "Go in the document." And she's like, "Oh, you mean I can go in?" I'm like, "Yes." Oh, so so it was just like a
Yeah,
misunderstanding.
yeah,
But it was like most people use Word, and they're like, okay,
yeah,
now I want to. But this is like a more of a fluid process. So it
yeah,
just
yeah,
there was some logistics that way. But I think it went really well. I mean, for the first time that I just had a vision for
yeah,
this, I think we played well with each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no. And then you said you've like done some events, you've kind of toured with it. And can you tell me what that looks like? Like, do people sh read their stories, and what has the
yeah,
responses been like?
it's been phenomenal. We've toured quite a bit in Oregon, Washington, and each time it's a little different, and we've been in different venues. So, for example, the most intriguing venue, I think, has been Divine Consign, uh,
Oh yeah,
which is
yeah.
this beautiful downtown store for First Friday. And it was just, I love the store. And I didn't even know that it was really a nonprofit. They give so much back to the community. So here we are just sort of sitting around in this comfortable furniture. And I think the lights were on because like, it's First Friday, but so some people were just like coming in like, oh, I think I'll look around and buy some furniture, but we're all like huddled in this
Yeah.
little space. And so I think people would just come in and they would just sit and listen. Um, and then like the month prior to that, we had a reading at the Underbar, which is a underground gay bar in Vancouver. I didn't know it was there until recently.
I didn't know it was
And
there either.
it and what I found was there was some miscommunication. So we get there, there's like a handful of us, and it's
Yeah.
busy. It's Friday, it's happy hour, and people are just having a great time. And I said to the bartender, I said, okay, we're good to go. And she says, I'm sorry, but who are you and why are you here? And I don't know,
Oh
no one
no.
ever told me about that. And I was like, oh my goodness. So she found out why we're there, and so she's like, okay, great. When 6 o'clock comes, I'm gonna turn off the music and we'll get you started. And I said, okay, this is fun. So we're off in this. You can imagine we're off this little corner of the bar, and on her phone, she just turns off the music. Like it's jamming, it's happy hour. All of a sudden, it's quiet. Everybody looks, and then I'm there as a guest, and I said, so are you gonna introduce me? She's like, nope, you can. So she just went off and started making drinks.
Oh
So and it was like, and I was like, I was kind of stunned because they're all like, why are you here? And I said, hey, do you all know what today is? And they're like, happy hour Friday. And I said, yeah, but it's a special Friday. And then someone, thank goodness, said, yeah, it's First Friday. And I'm like, that's right. And see all this beautiful art on the walls? And they said, yes, that's not us, but we actually have.
no.
So we read our stories, and it was hard because like some people were really paying attention and other people were sort of having their happy hour
Yeah, yeah.
conversation. And then it was this weird thing with people who were listening like, shh, and I was feeling really bad. I'm like, but they're having their happy hour, like they didn't know we were coming either. So it was great. So we usually do book signing, and I've met some great people that way. In Next week we'll be at Hillsborough Library. We've done it at Beaverton Library. Those are great places to
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Senior centers. We've kind of gone in a
That's
number of
all
different
over.
venues.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I think what it does is it gives us permission to have these conversations, because I don't think we've done a very good job just sort of saying like, hey, how
Yeah,
are you really? Like,
yeah,
what's
yeah,
going on for you? And it gives, and then when people share their stories, then it's like, oh my goodness, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was going
yeah.
crazy. I could, I was so isolated. And so anyway, it just kind of connects people, which I love to see.
How have you this I'm gonna have to think about how to word this because this just popped into my head, but I think COVID both isolated and kind of divided because you had people frustrated about mask mandates and how things were being handled, and you had other people who were feeling like they needed to even isolate more than maybe they absolutely had to. And I think for me personally, it created some anger and frustration. I'm guessing I'm not the only one in that. So how have you found it when you're out and you're having conversations about this? Like, do those divisions come out, or does this function as maybe some catharsis in a way because we all had to go through it? And
I think it's the latter, actually, in terms of regardless of our position on things, we all had to like figure this out, like in terms of, do I get vaccinated?
yeah, yeah,
Do I wait to get vaccinated? And then I was working with a lot of older adults who truly, truly wanted to get vaccinated, but couldn't because in Oregon, the website really wasn't working well.
yeah,
And then they're
yeah,
competing with teachers. And so it was just like, a lot of stuff. But um, I don't think that comes up so much, but I think what does is just sort of these different associations. For example, another one of my favorite stories is called Not Summer Camp. And I don't know if you've read that one, but it was actually not even a story. This is an unsolicited story, but one of my dear friends, her husband had dementia, and she was concerned, and so she sent an email to all of her friends far and wide and just said, "Here's what's going on with my husband, and I just want to keep you up to date." But really, what she was struggling with is, how do I get him even eligible, because he has to go Medicaid, and it was all these forms. And
Yeah.
then it was like, but what if I might not see him again? And so, and then she finds
Yeah.
out that the memory care unit's on the third floor. So there's a lot of angst, but it was written so beautifully. She gave me permission to print one of those emails that's in the story, and not summer camp, because her husband didn't know that he was
Yeah.
moving. They just kind of did that, and it was just
Yeah.
so it brought up a lot of those emotions that I remember, like of couples trying to talk through a window,
Right.
that kind of
Right.
thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just an interesting, um, it's an interesting thing that I don't think is happening a lot, going out sharing your stories, and I would imagine that it actually is something that we probably should be doing more of, just because it does help to work through things.
I think so. It's funny, when I was presenting this to a particular venue, the person who's a colleague of mine said, "I think it's a great idea, but like, aren't we done with COVID?" He's like, "Are
Yeah.
you sure? Like, you want to do this? It's like,
Yeah.
can we
Yeah.
just move on?" Because especially with different venues, it was like, we're closing, we're opening, but then you have to wear a mask, and then the mask. It's
Yeah.
like, we've listed the mask mandate, and then it's all that. So it's all of that, and
Yeah.
he's like,
Yeah.
"I just don't think that people want to talk about that. I think they want to." But it turned out that was one of the best showings that we had, because I think people do want to sort of like
Yeah. Yeah.
be part of that conversation.
So when
Yeah.
you do these events and you're sharing the stories from the book, do people from the audience then share as well sometimes, or how does that usually work for you?
Yeah, so each one's a little different. So typically what we do is we have each author read about a 5-minute section of their story. Each story would probably take between 10 and 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you could do that, but then it's a longish read.
Right.
So we try to
Right.
get as many different stories. So we try to get 5 or 6. And so what we do, sometimes we'll just do Q&A, and we did that, for example, up at the at Divine Consign. Sometimes we just do a reception, and people can ask questions one on
Yeah.
one. But what's interesting, my story, actually, when I had the idea to have this anthology, my story is called Metamorphosis, and the story that I told is not a story that I thought of at the time, because it happened sort of later in the pandemic, and it's
Yeah.
about my relationship with my father, and how that changed as a result of going to ancestry.com. And so I
Yeah.
kind of forged this new path with him. So and it was so funny, because I told my story question that I hadn't thought of, and she said, "Well, what about your friend Jim? Are you guys related?" And I was like, "Oh, I never addressed that in the story." They were like, "What about you and Jim?" Because that's one of the reasons we kind of did the ancestry.com, because we thought
Yeah.
we were maybe distant cousins. But I never really addressed that. I kind of forgot about it. They said, "Are you and Jim related?" I'm like, no, 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 we're not related, but thank you for asking." So that's the nice
Yeah.
part about
Yeah.
Q&A, is like people can just have that
Yeah.
exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what you said about somebody saying, well, nobody wants to talk about that anymore. And I think what's interesting is we think we don't, because we're all tired of it. But it's probably good that we do, because I think we all probably have some leftover stuff that could use with the good talking through. So when you do you said you had an event in Vancouver coming up. Oh, for Pride. Is that for Pride Month in
Yes.
June? Um,
Yes. I think we're doing it. Yes. Yes.
and then you have a tour thingy, you
Yeah.
said,
So
after
we
that. So
started
tell me more about that.
so we just started our tour just because we thought it'd be fun. We started in Bend, Oregon. That was our very first tour. And so for Deschutes Public Library. We did two down there, one in downtown Bend and also Sun River. And that kind of got us started. And then what I really wanted to do is have a big event in the Portland metro area. And so I invited all of the authors to come and we did a weekend. It was just like, woo, a lot going on. And one of our writers lives in LA. And so he came up and he has friends and family in Vancouver. So he got to stay with friends in Vancouver. And then two of our editors live in Bellingham, Washington.
Oh,
And
fun.
they were very involved with sort of doing story coaching, developmental editing. So they came down and they're both, well, she's in her 70s and one's in his early 80s. So it was a big deal. They came down.
Yeah.
And it was the first time that everybody really got to meet each other, except for the people who'd gone to Bend together, because these are people that didn't know each other prior.
Yeah.
And it was just so beautiful to have these two very different experiences. One was at a library, one was at a senior center. We had different, some people the same each day, some people different, but it was just a really nice opportunity to connect. And again, like I think it was the first time where someone says, "Hey, can you sign my book?" And I
Oh,
was like, "What?"
yeah.
Like they're like a book
Like,
signing. Like
yeah, yeah.
they bought the book there and like, "Can you sign it?" And I was like, "Okay." And then it was kind of strange. And then somebody actually in the bar in Vancouver said, "Oh, I have a special pen." She's a poet. She goes, "I always use my special pen." So she told me. So now I bought a dozen on Amazon. So when I go out, I have these really nice
Yay. Well, you have
pens
to.
that look
It's
so much
real.
better. Yes, I'm just like, "Oh, that's great."
Yeah, there's all these
So
conversations about from authors of which are the better pens to use because you don't want to smear and all this. Yeah,
yes, and I'm left-handed, so I've got to be really careful. So yeah,
yeah.
it's been great. So I think we're going back to Vancouver June 2nd, I believe. It's the first Friday. Um, and so yeah, so we're just going all over. It's a lot of fun.
When you are in Vancouver, is that going to be an event that's open to the public?
Yes, all of them are
Okay.
free so far and open to the public.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So I mean, I think like for example, not everybody probably would want to go to the underbar, but I had a blast, and it was fun. Several of them are at let's see, we haven't had any in a bookstore yet, but the one on June 2nd, I believe, is it
At
Birdhouse
Birdhouse?
Books?
Yeah. Okay.
Birdhouse, yeah. We're doing
Yeah.
it the first Friday at Birdhouse Books. That will be one of our Pride ones that we're doing. And then with the new one, I'm planning to release that right before Pride next year,
Oh,
and we'll
fun.
have a whole
Yeah.
bunch set up. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I would definitely want to write that one down and so that people know that that's happening because that would be very fun. So tell me about the new anthology.
Oh, thank you. It just actually kind of came to me recently with something that was kind of in the back burner. And I think mostly because when I've been touring with some folks, several of the authors just happen to be LGBTQ,
Yeah.
not all of them. And so when we did not vintage, Divine Consign, excuse me, I think all of us were LGBTQ except one of the authors. And when we toured together on the road, we just formed like this nice friendship. Not everybody knew each other prior. And then it just sort of struck me as like, wouldn't it be nice to sort of just have something that would cross like generational boundaries in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
like our coming of age. Like I just turned 60 this year, and I find that like a lot of us in our community don't even know our own history.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like we know about marriage equality because it was like fairly recent,
It
but
was
we don't
recently. Yeah.
know
Yeah.
it's recent, but we don't know a lot of the other stuff. And so
Yeah.
I was strange. I went to see a play a few weeks ago, and I'll just keep it really brief. But it was two gay men, San Francisco, and it was the early AIDS epidemic, and it brought up a lot of
Yeah.
memories for me, like just stuff I hadn't thought of in a long time. And the next day, I got up at 6 in the morning and I just cranked out this piece that
Yeah.
is sort of what I'm really after, which is sort of like comparing, contrasting, and just trying to like help educate or help explain what it was like when I was coming out
Yeah.
or trying to come
Yeah.
out, and
Yeah.
2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And also during the AIDS epidemic, there was a lot of homophobia and there was a lot of hatred towards gay people. And we didn't seem to matter in terms of like a president that couldn't even say the word AIDS. So I felt like my job was not to sort of get on this high horse, but just to really explain how that sort of shaped
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
worldview.
Yeah.
And then now, as a 6-year-old, kind of reflecting back some of the things that I see different now. So that's kind of where we're going. We're going to have our first Zoom call in a few weeks,
All
and
right.
we have about
Good.
15 people who have expressed interest so far, and I'm
Yeah.
hoping that we bring a few more people on.
Yeah.
So
No, that's actually
yeah,
I'm excited to hear it, and I'm real excited to see how it goes, because I think that there's so much has happened in that history timeline in the last, 40 years, that um I look at my kids and think, like, they're experiencing some things now that I wish they weren't, because of all the legislation and stuff that's going on across the
right,
country. But they don't they don't really have an understanding of 20, 30 years ago, and what that was like, and how much has changed in some respects for the better. um you know and it's so, yeah, I think it's really interesting to have the different perspectives from different generations, because there's a lot of things that I thought I would never see in my lifetime that now have happened. And
right.
so, yeah, that's
Yeah,
exciting. You will have to keep us posted.
I definitely will. I a few months ago, I was asked to do an educational thing for high school students on, you know, gay rights kind of stuff. And I did, and I decided to bring in 10 people that I'm sure that these young people had never, ever heard of before, like these unsung heroes. And many of them people of color, and they're like, wow. So I got them talking about it and in small groups and saying, now, of all these people, who do you admire the most, and why is that? And so they really got to see what life was like before
Yeah,
Stonewall, even
yeah,
post Stonewall. But it was like it gave them a reference point, and it just kind of something inside of me sparked when I was doing that, because
yeah.
I'm like, wow, there's so much even that
Oh,
I don't know that I'm finding out. So
yeah. And so
yeah,
much interest, and then also because it's not something that schools teach. There's a lot of, not just because you don't know, because you're not exposed to it. And so, yeah, that's
yes. And I feel like we have a responsibility, because if we don't tell our stories, then what happens is we end up um, getting kind of whitewashed. We sort of like somebody else will tell our stories,
yeah, yeah,
and they're not as authentic. Just like if you look at civil rights and slavery and how we explain civil rights in our history books, it's not what it really should be. And so the
yeah,
same thing with gay rights, it's like, well, I want to make sure that we're telling our stories so that
exactly.
we
Yeah,
get to share what we've been through, and not somebody else telling what we should have gone through, or
yeah.
what they think we went
Or
through. So
there,
yeah,
or, honestly, just even when it's an honest attempt to tell a true story, it's like, we work really hard in the bookstore to make sure that the term own voices is really important to us. If I'm seeing a book about Black history, or Japanese American history, or whatever, the first thing I'm going to go look at is who wrote this. you know because I'm going to get a different version of it if it's a white person writing it versus somebody from that community. And no matter how much good research the person does, being from the community, you're just telling a more authentic version of the story. So,
yeah.
yeah, that's wonderful. I'm excited.
Oh,
And we
thank
will
you. Yeah,
definitely keep us posted too about, like, any other events in Vancouver that you guys do. Um, because
yes,
it
I will. I'll
be
send some
happy
dates to
to.
you. Yeah, to help
Okay.
promote
Yeah,
that.
because
Yeah,
we'd be happy to post them up and just let people know they're happening, and so the community can get out and see them.
I
So,
appreciate that.
yeah.
Thank you.
All
Yeah,
right. Well, thank you so much, Paul. And it was really nice to talk to you tonight. And I'm
same
excited
here,
to
Christy.
talk to you again, I'm sure, in the future.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye bye.